Hi everyone, Armoured Pants here, and as promised and as asked for by you subscribers, we're going to have a look at the VK9001P and we're going to have a complete guide as always. And as always, we will have a look at the tech spec when we use blitzhanger.com for that. And of course, that's what you guys want and expect, and we will deliver. But you know, this is not a real tank, by the way. It never existed, not even on blueprints. But yet, it does have a kind of interesting etymology, interesting source of its name, etc. So we'll have a look at that when we go through the tech spec in some detail using blitzhanger.com. And then you'll see kind of where Wargaming got the idea when they were designing this tank for the Christmas event last year. And indeed, this tank has gotten a buff since it first appeared in at that Christmas event. So let's have a look at it now. So I would run chocolate improved fuel on chocolate bar to max out performance. I would also run gun rammer supercharged and refined gun, though you can run calibrated shells, and we'll discuss why you might use either in a few minutes. It's got 128mm or 12.8cm Quack 44 L68 1A gun. The reload is 10.5 seconds using gun rammer. It goes out to 11.3 seconds using calibrated shells. Your pen is 275mm, 320mm and 65mm if you use gun rammer on AP, APCR and HE. If you use calibrated shells, it goes up to 289, 336 and 72mm with HE, which is similar kind of to Hesh numbers, which is why you might want to consider using it. Your damage is 460, 390 and 600. And when you look at that damage, that's why you might want to consider using calibrated shells rather than gun rammer. Muzzle velocity is 1196 meters per second for AP and HE, going up to 1495 meters per second for APCR. So it doesn't have great muzzle velocity either. And then when you look at the gun index, it's 13.2, which is kind of poor for a tier 10, right? So that's kind of around what you'd expect at tier 8. So therefore, its gun performance is not great, especially when you consider it's a German tank. And I guess that's one of the reasons this tank gets a bit of hate, right? Because it does get a lot of hate, right? And we're going to discuss some of the reasons for that too. Its mobility index is 1.98, which is kind of also poor, right? So I mean, particularly when you compare it to some of the heavies it's going to be competing against, like the IS-4, IS-7, etc. So it's sort of like just slightly better than the Maus and the E100, so it's pretty poor mobility index. And its concealment numbers are also poor, right? So something like a Vickers, right, which has a view range of 3 to 4 meters, is going to spot you up at 294 meters. That's your best case. That's when you're not moving and not firing. So it only gets worse after that, and your own view range is only 282. So you expect to spend a lot of the game with a light bulb over your head. So they're all kind of bit negative things. So you're probably thinking, Armoured, well, what the fuck is this tank good at? This is what it's good at. Look at the front of this thing. It's like a tomato with an erection, right? It's fucking so red, it's unbelievable, right? This tank has one role at which it excels, being the tip of the spear. Now, when we looked at the role of heavy tanks within the game, we said that, heavy tank should be going to strategic points on the map and seizing those and acting then as a linchpin for the rest of the team to play and to unroll a strategy and to win the game. And that is what this tank excels at. Front on, if you can get into a side scraping position, which you need to do, you need to know how to side scrape in this tank. If you can't, it's game over, because you can get penned from the side and the back. It's not a Maus, right? It doesn't have armor that's going to get you bounces on the side and the back. You need to be able to side scrape, particularly because it's a rear mounted turret. As you can see here, when you look at the armor profile at the back and at the sides, you're going to be penned by almost everything. Even light tanks can pen you at the sides and that. So you need to be able to side scrape. But if you can get into a position where you can protect that lightly armored part on the lower plate and just have the bottom, middle and top of the tank sticking out, you will get bounces all day long. You will frustrate the enemy. You can seize that position. And that's what this tank is good at. That's what it excels at, being the tip of the spear. All right. Now, of course, you need to get into that position because it has poor traverse. It has, it doesn't have a great rate of fire. It doesn't have great pen numbers. It's not doing huge alpha, right? But that's what it excels at. And it's better in those positions than other tanks. No, but you have to get the angles right. But when you do, and when it works beautifully. And we're going to have a look at a game here, which is the perfect execution, I think, of how you should play this tank and what it excels at. Now, in this game, it's a 10k net damage game, but the damage dealt is less than 3k. So this tank absorbs almost 7.5k of damage and survives the match at tier 10. And that's phenomenal, right? So we're going to have a look at this gameplay in a second. And this gameplay is exactly what we spoke about in terms of being a linchpin, of seizing a strategic point in the map, absorbing damage, bouncing damage, and enabling your team to win. And when we have a look at the scores of the enemy team at the end of this game, check how low they are. And yet it wasn't for a lack of firing, because they could have had an extra 7+ k of damage if they had penned the VK, which they don't. So let's have a look at this. And again, another thing to take note of about this gameplay in this tank is that this is not about me or about my gameplay. It's about the team. And this is something which has been missing in Blitz for quite some time, right? Is actual people thinking about the roles of their tank vis-a-vis others. But what I do here is I go to a point in the map where I can engage the enemy, take their fire, and allow my team basically the freedom to go and win the game. And this game looks very, very tight for a long time, but in the end it's quite an easy win. And the reason it looks tight is because, you know, I'm getting a lot of hits and it doesn't seem like we're making too much inroads. But you'll see the effect of all the concentration of fire on me, and me being able to absorb and to bounce that damage. But I have no idea what the T44 is here. He's probably still fucking surprised after being up-tiered into a tier 10 game. By the way, guys, if you're platooning, if you're not an experienced player, platoon with the same tier, right? That stops you getting the possibility of plus to minus 2 being up tiered, you know, because, you know, that just sucks being a tier 8, tier 10. So we can see here at the start I've already absorbed 3k of damage, and what the position I have here is perfect for this tank, right? Because the bottom part of that lower plate, vulnerable lower plate, is hidden. And basically what they're aiming at now is the most difficult parts of this tank to pen. It has a fantastic turret, and its upper hull armor is fantastic. Now, of course, I'm taking some hits. I am getting penned, but that's because I can't angle up to them all correctly all at the same time. But that said, I'm up to almost 5k of bounce damage now, and I'm, you know, just by moving it and changing the aspects of the armor, you can see now it's almost a 5.5k, almost a 6k of bounce damage. Now we said we'd discuss a bit about the history of this tank while we look at me just getting pummeled here and just absorbing damage from my team. So the VK4501P is a tank that you're all familiar with, but you may not know it by that designation. But it's the Tiger Porsche, right? The Tiger P at tier 7. And Porsche was asked to submit a heavy tank project. In the end, it wasn't successful. Then the Tiger 1, the iconic Tiger 1 we have now, is what was chosen instead. So VK is short for the German designation of work in progress, or, you know, project tank. So VK is the designation for that. 4501 is the 45-ton heavy tank that was asked for. In the end, the Tiger Porsche, I think, was 68 or something like that. But 45 was what was asked for, so 45-ton. 01, first variant, and P for Porsche. So this is this is sort of a created tank based on the assumption of history, though, that if Porsche were asked, when the Germans were looking for heavy tank designs around the Maus, etc., to submit a design, this is what it would be, right? VK, experimental tank, 90 ton, which is what was asked for. 01, first first variant, and P for Porsche. And of course, at that time, the Germans were looking and experimenting with rear-mounted tanks. So the designers of Wargaming thought that should Porsche have submitted a design in late 1944 or late 43, early 44, whatever like that, this is kind of what would have been submitted as a rival, let's say, to the Maus design. So that's sort of where, so it's not a tank that existed, but it's not completely made up fantasy tank in that it's sort of basically just extrapolating information that we know to be historically true to give us this tier 10 tank, which if Porsche had been asked in 1944 to submit, this would have been its designation: VK experimental tank, 90 ton, 01 for its variant, P for Porsche. So that's where it comes from. So I hope that makes a bit of sense to you guys, and that little bit of research I did kind of helps you out a bit. So again, not a real tank, but also not a complete fantasy tank either. So there you go, guys. As I promised, almost 10k, I think it is exactly 10k net damage gain, but only 2.5k of damage dealt, but 7.5k of damage absorbed. And look at the scores of the enemy team. All right, look how low they are, and that's because that's not about the shots they fired; it's about what penned. And over 7.5k of the damage they fired didn't pen on me. And that allowed my team then to go and win the game. So that is, I think, a great example of the strength of this tank, of it being exemplary in the role at which it is good and designed for, getting that steel wall medal. But it's not just about me and my play, it's about creating that space and enabling my team to play and to win, and in the end to win quite easily. I think, this is a perfect example of the role of this tank and how it can be executed effectively for your team to do well. And as I said, a 10k net damage game is something phenomenal at any tier and for any tank. Anyway, so let's have a quick recap on this tank and some of the essentials, right? So this is a frontline monster. If you get out into that right position, tip of the spear, seizing those strategic positions and enabling them to be a fulcrum around which your team can play. A side-scraping monster, it's an essential skill. Don't play this tank if you don't know how to side-scrape, because you will not enjoy it. But it's very effective at its job. But also remember what it's not. It's not a mouse, right? It's not going to get you bounces on the side, and that you need to play to its strengths. So be cognizant of what it is, but also don't play it as something it's not. Don't play it as a mouse. Don't play it as an E100. It's not as heavily armored on the sides as those guys. Positioning and angling is key to this tank. If you are not confident that you can do that well, then don't play this tank. If you want some help with that, watch the heavy tank guide, because it's all in there about how to side scrape, what their heavy tank role should be, and there's a link provided. So I hope you found that useful. I hope you found it helpful. And now I guess all that remains for me to say, as always, is cheers mush and pants off.